Please join me in welcoming Chris McDougall.
That was great. Thank you. Yeah, thank you so much. It's really nice to get a chance to discuss this book with people who already know sort of where it came from, and most of the people I've been bumping into are familiar with Born to Run, and that adventure of Born to Run really fed into this one for a couple different reasons. One was just sort of the research. You know, when I first began looking into the story of Born to Run, I didn't realize there was such this amazing trove of running and physiological history which had been kind of forgotten. Things about Emil Zatopek and Percy Cerutty and Arthur Lydiard, all these great masters of the past who had uncovered this profound wisdom, and then we sort of forget about it, and then we try and reinvent it again and again. And it was while doing that research that I first heard about the Cretan runner, who I originally thought was some kind of runner, into some kind of marathoner or ultra marathoner, and then discovered no, he wasn't that kind of runner at all. He was a foot messenger during World War II. So it sort of intrigued me, but it didn't really fit the scheme of Born to Run, so I put it aside. But then something else happened, and if you've read Born to Run, you're familiar with Caballo Blanco, Micah True, who lived most of his life in Matt's hometown of Boulder, that Netherlands region, and then went down the Copper Canyons of Mexico to spend his time with the Tarahumara Indians. Well, a few years after the book came out, I was in Los Angeles for a speaking event like this, and when I arrived at the venue, my phone had died a couple hours earlier, the battery died. So when I showed up, the host came up to me and said, "Oh, Maria's been trying to reach you. Maria Walton is desperately trying to reach you." That's Caballo's girlfriend. So I borrowed her phone and called Maria back, and she said, I think we need help. Mike is missing. He went for a run and he didn't come back. And I'm like, well, that's what the dude does all the time. It's like the story of his life. And she said, no, he left Watahuco tied up overnight. Now, Watahuco was this mangy, like half coyote mutt that Micah had found down the Copper Canyons. This is like a scary, wild canyon dog. And naturally he adopted it and tried to turn it into a pet who did not want to be a pet. And it's like this snarly, mangy, like lesion thing. And but Caballo treated this thing like a baby and cared for it down the canyons, and wherever he went, he actually was back in Boulder, Matt. And imagine him walking down the streets of Boulder carrying his dog in his arms like a baby. This thing's sort of snarling. And the one time he put him down, this thing runs in the street, gets hit by a bus, breaks its leg, and so now he's got this gigantic, plaster cast on its leg. While it's things like the size of a German Shepherd. He's like walking around with this thing. He would sit down for a burger and a beer outside, and he's trying to eat his burger over the dog's back while the dog's trying to bite it. So this is his dog, but the bond between them was really tight. And one thing you knew for sure was that Caballo would never, ever leave this dog tied up overnight. So what Maria told me had happened was, in 2013, that race which he had begun down the canyon a few years before, and the year we went there, the year I wrote about, 7 of us showed up. Well, over time, it began to grow. It went from 7 to about 15 to about 50 until that year, 2013, it had gone from 7 to more than 700 runners were turning up the bottom of this canyon for this crazy cross-country race that he had created as a way of trying to blend the cultures, trying to bring people from the outside world down to the canyon so let them realize what the Tarahumara knew, and letting the Tarahumara know that there are people in the outside world who valued and respected what they could do. So this gigantic race, and it was Caballo's masterpiece. It was finally his dream had come true. Everyone's getting together, they're running, they're racing, they're drinking, they're dancing, they're having a big old festival. And so after the race, Maria was up in Arizona, so Caballo was driving north, and he stopped off in New Mexico. He always liked to hang out in the Gila wilderness whenever possible, because that's where Geronimo had run free, and it was kind of spiritual home for Micah. So he stopped off at a friend's place, tied up Watahuco, went for a little run, expected to be back in an hour, and then he never came back. So that was kind of distressing. Something was definitely wrong. So again, I was in Los Angeles. I called Luis Escobar, the photographer who'd been with us on the trip, and he lives in Santa Barbara. I said, have you heard about this? And I could hear traffic around him on the phone. He's like, dude, I'm already in the car. I'm coming down. He goes, where are you? I said, I'm in Los Angeles. He's like, I'll be there in 2 hours. So I came in for an event like this and said, I can talk, but I can't answer questions because I got to go. So I gave him a 1 hour talk, went out the door, grabbed my bags. Louis picked me up out front, and we were on our way down to New Mexico. And the whole drive down, we finally had to like yank him out of the front seat and put him in the back, because the dude was like driving and texting and calling. And he's like mounting this like all points bulletin, gathering people to come for the search. And every step along the way, every couple of hours, we had to pull over, meet someone by the side of the road who like dropped their car, hop into ours, and keep going. And at 2 o'clock in the morning, we stopped off to get gas, and I was reaching for my wallet, and Lou was like, no, it's already been paid for. Someone had PayPal'd him money to pay for gas on the way down. So we get down there, and even though we had driven straight through like a bullet through the night, we were not the first to arrive. Like, other people had come. Scott Jork had flown in from Denver. The Skaggs brothers, 2 ultra runners who lived in New Mexico, had driven out there. Guy from Canada, Simon Donato, had hopped on a plane. He was flying down. The actor Peter Sarsgaard, who had met Micah one time and actually didn't get along with him at all, found him really insulting and condescending. He flew out. So very quickly, out of the middle of nowhere, this search party began to grow and grow. And I sort of took a step back as it was happening, thinking, it's really kind of weird because this guy did not try to make friends. He was a surly kind of. Did you actually meet him, Matt? Did you ever run into him? Okay. But you know the type, right? The bolder type, just kind of sort of a holier than thou kind of ex-hippie kind of dude. And yet he really struck things in people so much that people who barely knew him or didn't know him, when they thought he was in trouble, they all came rushing down to help. We didn't get there in time. I don't think there was any time to get there. And the irony of it is that he had been definitively spotted heading northeast into the woods. They knew exactly where he had to be. There's a quadrant there. Absolutely, to a scientific certainty, he had to be in the northeast quadrant. And we spent 5 days searching that quadrant until finally someone thought, you know what, if he absolutely has to be here, then he's probably there. And he turned around and went to the southwest, and there he was. He had died by the side of a creek. Still unclear why, exactly what happened. The autopsy revealed an enlarged heart, which really isn't a cause of death for an ultra runner. He had an enlarged heart because he was running like 200 miles a week. But it's more likely that he developed some kind of parasitic disease which had weakened the walls of his heart. But again, I was sort of struck by this thought of like, man, why would Simon get on that plane in Canada? He had to know that there was no way that this guy was going to be alive by the time he arrived, and yet he went anyway. And same with Scott. When he flew in from Denver, he knew that he was not going to find a living guy, and yet that need to just move and do something really stayed with me, and I wanted to find out more about it. And that was one of the things, that was one of the impulses that had me circle back to this idea of the Cretan runner, because one of the things I never really understood about resistance fighters is like, why do you bother? When German forces come and occupy your country, you have two choices. You can keep your head down, wait for better days, or you can do what these guys do, which is rush out there and fight what you know is a losing battle. And then I started thinking about something else too, is like even physically, not even mentally, why do you make this choice, but physically, how do you actually pull this off? Because when I started to look back into this guy known as the Cretan runner, George Secundakis, and questioned what he did, what he was doing was physically impossible. So let's begin at the beginning of the story. So what happened on Crete was this. When Hitler began rolling into Poland at the beginning of World War II, what he was up against were armed forces across Western Europe, which had devoted the previous 30 years to doing only one thing, which was keeping all the Germans in Germany. Like, they knew at some point Germany was going to try and bust out. So all that France and Belgium and Luxembourg and the UK was doing was creating defenses, both physically and in terms of manpower, to just bottle up the Germans, because at some point they're going to play some shenanigans again. So that's what Hitler was facing. He was facing an entire continent devoted to stopping him, and they were extremely effective for like a half an hour. And after that, he just blazed on through. He destroyed every army in a matter of months. I mean, he knocked over 9 major armies in a matter of months. It was an astonishing military performance. He was extremely close to winning the entire war. All he had to do now, after Western Europe was conquered, is get to Eastern Europe. You knock off the Russians, you win. There's no way the U.S. is going to get involved at that point. There's no interest in the U.S. being a combatant in a war against someone who controls all of Eastern and Western Europe. But the path to Eastern Europe leads through Crete. And Crete is otherwise pretty insignificant. It's a small island off the coast of mainland Greece. Not strong, not big. There's no resources there. The only thing that is useful for it is it's a convenient stepping stone across the river. So you step on Crete on your way there. It's a nice transit spot. So, Germans had knocked off France in 5 days, so they figure, okay, 24 hours. We go in, lock down Crete. We store all of our equipment, our supplies, our manpower there. We use it as our big sort of Costco warehouse en route to Russia. So that's what he did. They launched the biggest air invasion in military history on Crete, 80,000 soldiers dropping from the sky. So if you were a Cretan that morning, you would notice like the sky getting dark, and you look out and see it was absolutely blanketed by parachutes and gliders and planes coming in for a quick, massive blitzkrieg aerial assault to conquer the island. But what the Cretans did was unique, because unlike anywhere else in the world, the Cretans resisted immediately. It was the only place where the resistance sprang up before the Germans even hit the ground. So these guys were strapping steak knives on brooms and running out the door as a unified body to fight back, which sounds like stirring and heroic, but when you think about it too, it's such an anomaly, because right now, if there's a big bang outside that door, I guarantee all of us are not going to react the same way. You know, we're not going to grab chairs and go rush into the door. These guys did. And they put up a fight that was so determined that the 24-hour deadline came and went, and the Germans could not get control of the island. So that was day 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Day 5, Hitler sends a telegram to Kurt's student, head of Luftwaffe, and says, what's going on Crete? France fell in 5 days. Why is this island with no standing army still fighting? Took student 10 days to finally get control of the perimeter of the island. And so what the civilians did was, okay, you get the perimeter, we'll head up into the mountains. And then went up into the mountains to keep fighting back. So at that point, Hitler was out of patience, not a particularly patient man in the first place. And so he sent this guy along. This is General Kurt's student, hang on, it's General Friedrich Müller. That thing around his neck, as you know, is an iron cross. I learned the sign language for badass recently, which is this, if you ever want to know. But he is a notorious badass. You win one of those things for distinguished service in the German army, which is pretty distinguished service. He was one of Hitler's most experienced generals, so he puts him on Crete. He's like, you know what, no more messing around on Crete. You rule this island with extreme brutality. Anybody gets out of line, you put a bullet in their head. You see any village up to any nonsense, you burn it to the ground. I want this place secure. I want to get my troops in and out and off to Moscow. So that was General Mueller's mandate. Do whatever the hell you want, ignore the Geneva Conventions, control this island any way you can. And he had 80,000 armed troops at his disposal, but he was up against forces which might be pretty formidable, because up against General Friedrich Müller, who became known as the Butcher of Crete, was this guy. That's George. So George is the guy who became known as the Cretan runner, George Secundakis. He was a shepherd. He had never served in the military at all. He was pretty small, was pretty shabby, didn't own a gun. Had a nickname as well. The Butcher was Crete was one guy. He was up against a guy known as the Clown. The Clown got his name because he liked to play pranks. He liked to write long, rhyming odes to things like Ode to an Ink Spot on a School Teacher's Skirt. But when the war began, George ran up into the mountains, and because he couldn't really fight or shoot or anything, he just ran messages. And that was the thing that I started to really sort of dial in on. It's like, how on earth does this guy do what he does? So Matt, you've run some long races. Have you run the London Marathon?
Yes.
Pretty hard?
Yes.
Okay, pretty hard. Did it look like this? Okay, this is the kind of landscape that this guy's operating on. So, I mean, without exaggerating, what he would do is resistance would be holed up in a cave up here, and they would say, okay, tomorrow morning at dawn, we're going to go down to the coast and blow up some German ships. Tell the other guys. He said, okay. Tomorrow at dawn, we blow up the German ships. Like, dawn's early. Tell them 9. Okay, 9. 9. So back and forth, back and forth. That's the only way to communicate. No radios, no walkie-talkies. Only George running up and down these mountains. A typical journey for George, because you want to spread the resistance as far as possible, would be 50 miles. 50-mile trek, deliver a message, get a reply, 50 miles back. 2 ultras, 1 weekend, no aid stations, no Cliff Bars, no power aid, no little silvery blanket at the end. On top of it, remember, you got a guy called the Butcher who's been told to put a bullet in your head if he sees you. So you're staying off the trail. You're going off trail as much as possible. You're trying to be invisible. So these 50 miles are 50 rugged trail miles with no ground support whatsoever. Again, you're a fit dude, Matt. If I ask you to do this, you tell me to go fuck myself. You say, no way am I doing double ultras in a weekend with no support and no navigation skills. And yet this guy did this again and again and again, and not only pulled it off, but he survived and thrived. And the common stories about him is like he burst into the cave, he'd have a smile on his face, he'd deliver the message, he'd have a little shot of moonshine, and be on his way again. Not only is the guy doing it, but doesn't seem to be having any physical toll. So, you know, you come across an outlier like this, there's only 1 or 2 possibilities. Either this dude is Wolverine, you know, with a titanium spine and regenerates cells, and there's nothing to be learned from him, or he is just a normal, dude, which he seems to look like, who has learned something that the rest of us can learn. And that became my question, is like, what exactly is this guy up to that's different than the rest of us? So again, the fact that this happened on Crete was not a coincidence. You know, Crete is one of these places, much like the Copper Canyons, which has remained kind of frozen in time. It has tapped into a way of life dating back thousands of years that the rest of us have sort of moved beyond, but they've never forgotten. And the thing about Crete is, because it was this isolated island that was constantly under occupation and invasion by outside forces, these guys were basically still doing the same things in the 1940s that they were doing back in the 1440s, that it had essentially never changed, the same kind of traditions. And the main tradition was this Greek art of the hero. All the stuff we read about Greek folklore and mythology, you know, these were not fantasy stories. These were kind of like survival tips. This is how you survive in ancient Greece. And the whole idea of those Greek myths is to tell people that you can actually do a lot more than you think you can if you learn these techniques. So the art of the hero, again, was not this thing like picking the right guy. The art of the hero is assuming everybody's capable and figuring out what they can do and trying to raise up their level. So what am I talking about? One thing in particular was strength. You know, we have this notion now of strength being about size, right? You go to the gym, right? You press some weights. You keep doing this, even though there's no reason whatsoever that you would ever have to do this. Yet you go to any gym in the world right there, I guarantee you'll see somebody doing this for absolutely no reason. You will never in your life have to do this other than like pick up your groceries maybe. And yet people are always doing this all the time, yet it serves no purpose. We've also got this sense, again, bigger, bulkier, more muscled is stronger. Yet if you were trying to survive out in the wilderness, I have to ask you a question, like, would you want a guy who looks like The Rock to be out there? Or would you want someone who looks more like this? So those are Fizz, Auntie, and Shirley. They actually train here in London over at the chain store. They're part of an all-female parkour crew. But what I think is really intriguing about this is, you know, parkour developed from this thing called the natural method that began back in the 1900s. And where it sprang from was there was a French naval officer named Georges Hebert who was stationed on a troop ship just off the island of Martinique. And when the volcano on the island began to explode, Georges Hebert hops in his life raft and he starts steaming in towards shore trying to save lives. And what he saw were tens of thousands of people, one of the greatest natural disasters at that time in history, tens of thousands of people dying right in front of him because they just couldn't do a couple of simple basic animal movements. And a movement that any kind of little dog or kitten or cat could do, but humans couldn't do it, like swim a few yards offshore or pull themselves up off the ground or pick up a child. Any cat can pick up a kitten and run for it, yet humans trying to pick up a 40-pound child were struggling, not because the weight was very much. I can give you a 40-pound box, you pick it up no problem, but a 40-pound kid, you know, they're kind of awkwardly balanced and like they don't have handles or they're difficult to grip. So if you haven't done it for the first time, it's awkward. So what Georges Hebert is looking at again are these needless deaths, and he's asking himself, like, what has gone wrong with us as a species where we cannot even save ourselves with very simple motions? So he went back to France after this and he decided to do a test. He took a bunch of his fellow naval officers and he decided to sort of test them in some basic human movements, basic human animal movements. And he identified 10 movements. Can you run, walk, and hike? Can you throw and catch? Can you defend? Can you pursue? Can you climb? Can you leap? And can you land? Things like that. And he tested his naval officers, guys who were supposed to be physically fit and ready to defend the nation. And he found that most of them could barely do at least half of the movements. And the ones who could do them couldn't do them well at all. So he began to train them. What he decided to do was strip them right down to basics. And by strip them, being French, he really meant like strip them down. He had them in these like little thongy things. And he created these big outdoor obstacle courses, the kind of things you see now with Spartan races. And he turned it into play. The number one rule of parkour is no competition. You can never win. No parkour games, no competition. Secondly, it's got to be outdoors. Thirdly, it's got to be in all conditions. You know, you don't do parkour on a sunny afternoon. You do it at 3 in the morning, you do it in the rain, you do it in the snow, any conditions. And the last thing was always and ultimately collaborative. The goal is to help other people, to push them along. And what you saw in that video right there, to me, is exactly what Georges Hebert was talking about. We've developed this unfortunate, inflated notion of what strength is, and it all sort of dates back to the unfortunate debut of this film in 1972 called Pumping Iron. You guys ever seen Pumping Iron? If you haven't seen it, or even if you have seen it, it is a crazy psychodrama. You got to check it out. It is a bizarre movie. You saw two things there which we'd never seen before. One was these like dudes in panties and oil just all conspiring behind each other's backs about how they hate each other and how they're going to beat each other, and sort of whispering, and it's like this little like cat fight among giant inflated humans. But the second thing you saw was something we'd never seen before, which is the largest humans in human history. Like, nobody had ever been the size of all those guys, for a simple reason. We just never had the technology before. We never actually had the drugs. And so by the time we had synthesized testosterone and created anabolic steroids, we now had the drugs which could supersize humans. You combine that with this exercise we talk about now too, where you isolate a muscle and you just keep doing repetitive motion until that muscle tears, and when it tears, it will swell with blood to immobilize it. So what we created were these gigantic, immobile people with damaged muscles. Again, the way you get big is you shoot something, isolate something, and damage it, and it will swell with blood. So we created the opposite of what we should have been doing. We're trying to get people like Fizz and Auntie and Shirley who can move and adapt and flow and laugh while they're doing it. And instead, we created these big, immobile creatures, which in a natural survival setting is exactly the opposite of what you want. You take someone like The Rock or Arnold and you put them in the jungle and they become lunch. Like, you're big and immobile, you're dead. Someone's gonna eat you. But if you put someone like Fizz and Auntie and Shirley in the jungle, I say my money's on them to actually get out of there and get out of there alive. They're quick, they can adapt, they can adjust to any kind of circumstances. So what George Hebert wanted to do was reverse this idea of muscular strength as being the gold standard and get back to the natural idea of suppleness and adaptability. The only problem was he developed this just before the beginning of World War I. So all these people he trained in the natural method were obviously fantastic as frontline soldiers. So they all got into the front lines. His entire teaching class got wiped out, and the natural method that George Hebert debuted in the early 1900s was essentially gone. But little vestiges lived on, and there's a guy named Erwan LaCour who I heard about a couple years later, and he went down to, that's a kind of cool female parkour crew. So Erwan LaCour, hang on a second, hang on. He read up on George Hebert, and this is a guy selling like trinkets and like glow necklaces on beaches in Corsica, but he became intrigued by the natural method, and so he went down to Brazil and hooked up with like mixed martial arts fighters, and they basically camped out in the woods and started exploring George Hebert's old techniques, trying to figure out whether they can actually bring them back to life. And this is Erwan in action, and the kind of things he's doing right now. He's a well-built guy, but he's not particularly big or muscular, but extraordinarily adept and agile. So I met him and trained with him in the woods for a while, and what I began to realize is this idea of how the Cretan runner was able to survive in the mountains began to make sense, because what Erwan is doing is just using all the elastic recoil strength, all the elasticity of his body, as opposed to using muscular force, which is a big energy drain. You can see how relaxed he is at all times, just flowing across his landscape. And so what I think the Cretan runner had been able to do, what the Cretan resistance was able to do, was tap into this kind of legacy of elastic recoil strength, the same thing a boxer uses when he's in the ring. Real light and loose and bouncy. And that was what made the difference between death and survival, was adapting to the landscape as opposed to trying to dominate it and overcome it. So my question then was, well, how can the rest of us learn this, and what's the benefit of this? The second thing too, so that was the strength element. The second thing had to do with energy input. So even if you are as skillful as Erwan and the parkour girls, the question then is, well, how do you fuel this thing? And it led me down another avenue too, looking at fat as fuel, fat adaptation. So most of us are on this constant sugar cycle, whether we call it sugar or not. But you get up in the morning, you have a bagel, that's sugar. If you have salad dressing on your salad at lunch, that's sugar. Bowl of pasta, rice, bread, that's all sugar. These are fast burn fuels that go through your body very quickly. If you do a marathon and you start taking any kind of those goos, that is just a pure sugar shot. That is a Mars bar to your belly. So most of us, all the time, we are constantly replenishing. We're on a sort of 3 to 4 hour cycle of throwing things down our hole in order to fuel the furnace. But I met a guy named Tim Noakes. Does anybody know who Tim Noakes is? You don't know that? So Tim Noakes is a sports scientist from South Africa. He's the guy who created the whole carbohydrate loading model in the first place. Back in the 70s, he was studying the data and he realized that the best way to perform endurance sports was to load up on carbohydrates, fast burn fuel, and then the next day you'll be able to just burn out all this fuel. So all these like pasta dinners you have before a marathon and the pancake breakfast and the oatmeal, that is all because of Tim Noakes. It became worldwide. It became a keystone of all endurance sports. You got a carbo load. The only problem was Tim Noakes, about 4 years ago, suddenly realized that after running 70 marathons and 15 comrades ultra marathons, he was diabetic, which really alarmed him because his dad had died of diabetes and his brother had died of diabetes. And he's like, I'm the fittest guy in the world. I'm the most esteemed sports scientist, and I'm dying of diabetes. So he went back into the research, spent 2 years analyzing nutritional data, and then he called a press conference. And keeping in mind, this guy has written a book called The Lore of Running. He is the go-to researcher for sports scientists around the world, and he has been for more than 40 years. He calls a press conference, and he gets in front of the microphones, and he goes, I've hurt a lot of people. I may have killed people, and I'm very, very sorry. I was wrong. And what he's wrong about was carbohydrates. He realized that the very thing he'd been telling people they needed to eat was the absolute worst thing they could be eating. It was a poison. He had prescribed this for years, and now he was paying the price for it. And since then, he's become one of the world's most aggressive and zealous spokespeople against this constant sugar cycle. Not only because it damages lives, but also because it's the opposite of what we're trying to accomplish. What George Sikandakis was able to do up in the mountains, at one point, George Sikandakis went for 3 days on a diet of only boiled hay. He put hay in water, and he boiled it, and he drank the water. Well, there are no calories in boiled hay. There's nothing. He just drank some brown water. That's all he did. Yet for 3 days, this guy is running through the mountains. I asked Tim Noakes about this, and he said, yeah, the reason why is because you have enough stored fat on your body to go for weeks without another bite of food. You can put a guy on a raft in the Atlantic, and then send him off to sea, and 3 months later they'll rescue him, and he's pretty much fine. He'll be pretty skinny, but he'll be fine. He'll be able to stand up and walk around. And the reason why is just that, is your body at all times is making a quick choice. It's either going to burn what's readily available in an emergency situation, or if there's no emergency, it's like, okay, we'll store this for later. Let's use the body fat that we've already got here. We don't need the quick burn stuff, so let's leave that for later. Your body's going to go to whatever it needs in a crisis. So if you go out for a run and there's sugar available and your heart rate starts to go up, your body interprets this as an emergency situation. Okay, my heart rate's going up, something must be chasing me. What can I burn really quick that will get me some energy? Oh, there's some sugar here, let's burn the sugar. And that's what happens. So we're in a constant sugar cycle. And then when the sugar is depleted, your body is thinking, okay, you know what, we just went through an emergency, we don't know when the next emergency is going to arrive. Let's store this fat, let's not use this fat, let's look for some more sugar. And your body starts to crave that sugar. So what guys like Tim Noakes did was go back into the research, and they realized that throughout history, endurance athletes have found effective ways of training their bodies to burn fat first, sugar last. And it's called fat adaptation. And so Noakes went back to a guy named Phil Maffetone. Crazy story, it's too long to get into right now, but Phil Maffetone was this chiropractor from upstate New York who became the go-to trainer for the top Ironman triathletes in the world, guys like Mark Allen and Mike Pigg. And the reason why was because this is predating all of the endurance products we have now. So if you're doing an Ironman, you're looking at 12 hours of effort. Well, you didn't have Cliff Bars, you didn't have power bars. So what are these guys going to do? So they became fat adapted. And these guys set records back in the late 80s and 90s, which weren't broken for the next 15 years. Nobody could touch these guys because the stuff they were doing on body fat was superior to what anybody was doing on the sugar cycle. What Noakes found most compelling about becoming fat adapted is it begins to reverse metabolic syndrome, which is one of the biggest killers in the Western world. Metabolic syndrome where your body is no longer processing the sugars anymore, and your insulin levels are spiking, and that's caused diabetes, diabetic-related illnesses. So he became a firm believer in this. But again, where I became intrigued was all these pieces of the puzzle started to come together for me. I began to see how a guy like Sikandakis could physically, with the strength, run through the mountains using the same kind of natural method activities as Erwan Lecour and George Hebert. I started to see this whole fat adaptation model where you get off the sugar cycle and get on to a fat model. When I actually met Noakes in DC, the dude's pushing 70 years old. And I offered to take him out for lunch. He'd just come out of a long conference, 3 hours of talking. And I offered to take him to lunch. And he's like, no, that's okay, I ate yesterday. And well, what'd you have? He said, oh, you Americans have the best bacon. I had a lot of bacon and sausages and eggs, and that was it. He hadn't eaten in 48 hours, wasn't hungry, didn't care. He was about to get on a plane to Cape Town, didn't care. But that's how slow his metabolic cycle was, like how slowly he was processing his foods. So where this left me was with an adventure story looking at something that the clown and his colleagues on Crete did, which had never been done anywhere else in the world in modern military history. These guys came up with a perfectly brilliant ancient Greek strategy of, you know what, if we can't defeat 80,000 soldiers, maybe we just got to get one of them. You know, it's a very Trojan horse kind of thing. Let's just use our brains and then reverse the whole power dynamic. So they decided to do something which had never been done. They decided they were going to go and grab the commanding general on the island. Let's go kidnap the butcher and go on the run, which is a really fucking stupid idea because you're on an island. There is nowhere to go. And on top of that, the reason why nobody ever tried this before is to actually get at this guy, you got to get your way through 80,000 soldiers, grab him, get him back through 80,000 soldiers, and then you're running. And where do you run? Because you have planes overhead, you have boats circling the island, you have search dogs, you have troops fanning out, you got Hitler who's already pissed off at Crete and done with the nonsense. That's the situation you put yourself into. And that's what these guys tried, and that's what they attempted. And where it left them was, at the end of the war, when General Wilhelm Keitel, who was the architect of the German war machine, was on trial at Nuremberg, and before they took him out and hanged him for war crimes, they asked him to make a final statement. And he said, if it wasn't for what happened on Crete, I wouldn't be sitting here today. Other people would be in this chair. It's because of the Greek resistance that we lost the war. He didn't blame Hitler, didn't blame Stalin, didn't blame Churchill, didn't blame the invasion of Normandy. People he blamed were those guys who tapped into that ancient art of the hero. They were able to tap into these resources and hold up the Germans just long enough so that by the time they finally got off Crete and finally started heading into Russia, it was too late. It had already started to snow, the winter had come down, and as you know, in Russia, you got to get in and out before winter. The Germans were just a step too late, and they lost the war. I just find this, you know, when we ask ourselves, well, why does any of this stuff matter? There are no Germans outside invading. But to me, the reason why it's important is because, you know, imagine you can go through life one of two ways. You can be sort of sedentary and I'm going to get in shape, I'm going to get ready, or you can be the kind of person that is ready all the time. And that was George Hebert's thought, is like, be useful. You know, if you can only accomplish one thing in your life, it's just to be useful. That if you need to do something, if someone's counting on you, can you actually stand up on your own 2 feet and step in there and help? And that to me was what the real crowning achievement of Crete was. And again, not that they killed Germans, not that they ran through the mountains, but the fact was that they knew themselves that in a crisis, and when someone needed them, they could actually step forward and be useful. Guys, I know that was a long burst of information, so I appreciate your attention, and I'd be happy to take any of your questions. Thanks very much. Thanks.
Let's ask questions. Could you unplug the, I think some sound, if you unplug this.
Sure.
Have you got questions? No questions at all.
Strangely incurious for Google. All right. It's a strangely incurious crowd.
Oh,
there you go. Verity stepping up. All right.
I'd just like to understand what happened to the clown in the end.
Oh, you know something? I have a little slide about that. It's really, see if we can find it here. That's what happened to the clown. But the fact was, you know what though? If you're going to go out and have a little monument to you for what you did, there's a lot more about him in the book, so I won't go into that now, but I think the guy went out in a blaze of glory. Yeah.
In researching the book, did you learn anything which you've now kind of taken on and you do daily? Sort of, what's the biggest thing you've taken away from that?
My favorite thing I took away is this. This is Colette. She's a middle school science teacher in Florida. When we start talking about natural movement, one of them is throwing. And one thing we all know about throwing is half of the species can't do it. Do we know which half that is, Verity? Which half of the species cannot throw?
Is this a diversity issue?
Is it the male half?
Is it the male half?
Is it? Are you asking me or are you telling me?
I'm asking.
Well, I'm asking you.
I'm telling you.
Who cannot throw?
The male half.
You ever see a female NFL player? Anyway, I'm just taunting you a little bit. We have this conception that girls can't throw like a girl, girls can't throw, which really flies in the face of what natural movement's all about. If, as George Hebert said, if it's natural, then everybody's got to do it, men and women, old and young alike. It's not natural if only half the species can do it. So why is it that we have this conception that girls can't throw, old people can't throw? And the reason why throwing is so important, you guys are in for another 45 minutes, by the way. The reason why throwing is so important, it's probably the most important movement ever in human history. Like the reason why you guys have your jobs here today is because some caveman picked up a rock and hit an antelope. Like that was the beginning of all creative imagination, because we're the only creatures that can do this. You can pick up a rock, and it's one thing if the antelope is right there, and okay, that's pretty easy. But if the antelope has other plans for the afternoon, like takes off, now suddenly the next thing you got to do is calculate a ton of variables like that. You got to figure out velocity and weight and texture and force. Hey guys, when you have a chance to read Natural Born Heroes, two of the gentlemen who probably do not want to be pointed to at this moment are Chris and P. White, who just arrived now. So you got to pick up this rock and then do something. You have to throw not where the antelope is, but where the antelope is not. You have to think into the future. You have to actually make that an act of creative imagination, creating a reality in your mind that doesn't exist yet in the world. And that led to everything else. That created language and literature and technology and engineering. So I became really intrigued by this. So, well, again, if throwing is so fundamentally important, what has happened? So that's one of the things I started practicing was I saw these videos of Colette chucking knives, and then she set this up in her kitchen. So when she was like doing the dishes and stuff, she would just grab steak knives and just start winging them. But I became intrigued by, first of all, how like relaxed she is. She's like kind of spinning around, like flinging her hair and having a good time, chucking underhand and sidearm, that kind of thing. That's a dangerous look. And so that's why I started to research. So yes, if I learned something. So one thing I started getting into is the whole thing about throwing. So I started practicing throwing knives myself, using this whole thing of no-spin technique. And then I went to see whether I could teach other people to throw knives. So I started with my daughters. I got a 14-year-old out there, dating age, and I put some knives in her hand, and I have no concerns about her anymore. Yeah. But one of the things about it too is, I'll just one quick little demonstration about throwing technique. So where throwing all comes from, actually, since I've already embarrassed you once, Verity. So here's a really cool thing about throwing technique. We have this idea of aim being a cerebral process where you stop and you look and you profile and you do all this kind of stuff. But actually, here's what we're going to do. So here's where aim comes from. If you just put your hands on top of my hands, just lightly. Now I'm going to move my hands around, okay, and I'm just going to follow my hands. All right, move them around here. Now I'm going to try and go faster and faster and try and shake you off, right? Right?
That's not going to happen.
Okay, can't happen, right? Right? Now let's do this. Let's move them apart a little bit. Separate our hands by about an inch or two. Same thing, okay, follow my hands. Ready? Right, good, good. Whoop, 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 whoop. Okay. When you actually have to use your brain, right, there's a disconnect. You're using your brain and your eye disconnect. If I ask you right now, like, point to my hands? Point to the screen?
Which screen?
Oh, yeah, two fists, yeah, two guns. But the idea is your brain actually instinctively knows where it wants to go. Your finger automatically knows where to go. So to actually turn yourself into a throwing machine, this whole idea of natural movement, is your body already knows how to do it. Where we get into trouble is we try to rationalize everything, turn it into a cerebral process instead of just a purely instinctive process. So if we worked for like 10 minutes, had some knives in your hand, you'd be like sinking them in that wall, like no problem. Do we have knives? Okay. So thanks, Verity. Yeah, there's a question in the back there too, wasn't there?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Maybe you might.
Come on.
I wanted to ask you a similar question about takeaways,
Come on.
but more about what you eat.
Oh, well, first I want to bring up, we have an opportunity to read the book. The reason why there's a book is because of this gentleman, Chris White, who I think, I don't think there's any way I can put you more on the spot than I am right now.
That's fine. Hello.
So Chris White is from Oxford, and early on, I'll get back to your question in 1 second. I just want to introduce Chris a little bit more. So when I first began this process, I heard about a guy named Patrick Lee Fermer who had been on Crete and had been involved in the abduction. And he was still alive, and I knew his address, I knew where he lived in Greece, and I'd written him several letters and didn't get replies. And so, in the newspaper business, as a journalist, the next thing you do then, you doorstop them. You show up at the door and you bang on the door until they come out. And so that was my plan. But On the way there, I had this sort of twinge of like, this is probably a bad idea. So I was able to contact Artemis Cooper and Anthony Beevor, husband and wife historians, who knew Paddy very well. And I was able to contact them, and they said, that is a really bad idea. If you go to see him, essentially, anybody who knows him is going to shut you out. It is a really bad thing, don't do it. And for very good reasons, they were right. But what they ended up doing was actually putting me in touch with Chris and his brother Pete, who probably, I would say, know more about every step of this journey than anybody else alive.
We do.
They do. And so I'd like to introduce, so I'll answer your question very briefly, and I'd like to turn over for Chris. Do we have time, Christina? Okay. So your question, what do I eat now? It's funny, you hear a lot of buzz about the paleo diet and a lot of advocates of the paleo diet. Essentially, I basically eat the paleo diet. I think if you cut out processed foods, you cut out anything high glycemic, and you stick to things which are high in saturated fats and vegetables. It's kind of like Michael Pollan said, eat real food, mostly vegetables, not too much. And to me, and I keep hearing it over and over again, anybody who shifts to a unprocessed, low glycemic diet, like the change is quick and very long lasting. So I'd like to introduce Chris White to tell you a little bit more about his journey, which actually became mine.
All right, okay.
Thank you.
Okay, you have that.
Okay.
Well, this is unusual. I was in Crete until Saturday, so
Yeah.
I've just arrived back, having Peter and I, we've walked the route 4 times now. Paddy only did it once, but he did lots of other trips as well, as you might imagine. And what we've done is we've found all the caves that were used by Paddy and with the general, but also some of the other places that he stayed. And we've helped write a book. Paddy's account, it's called Abducting a General, and it's on sale. It has been on sale. It is on sale. Coming out in paperback next month. And we helped edit that, and we wrote an account of how to walk the route. And we've just had feedback from some folk from Oxford who have followed our guide and said that it worked very well. So, as far as we can tell. So we found lots of caves and things, and I could show you those now.
Do we have time to show some caves and things? How's
Yeah,
it?
we have sort of about half past. We have about 8 minutes left.
I've got to get a memory stick.
Okay. Maybe for another.
We can email them around afterwards.
All right.
Yeah.
All right. I could talk to you about it another day.
Yeah. But no, I became intrigued by Chris because it also sort of gave me like a mnemonic, like when in doubt, find a Brit, because like whatever you're interested in, like somewhere there's someone in the UK who has been doing this for 15 years and has been studying everything for no apparent reason, and that's what. So I was. Am I wrong about that?
No. It was very good to do.
Yeah, and so and so that basically became to me, because as Chris pointed out, Paddy himself didn't know exactly where he had gone. You know, he's running through the mountains, running for his life. You're not actually stopping and checking GPS coordinates and mapping things. So what Chris was able to do was recreate this entire thing. So if you're going to talk about a physical challenge, you got to know what the challenge is, like where exactly did they go and how did they survive. And that to me became the kind of the map that the whole story was based upon. Yeah. Are there any other questions? Yes.
If you wanted to do that walk, what time, what season would be best to go?
The spring is delightful, and that's when they were doing it. From April 26th to May the 14th was the time they were doing it, and we do that. We do it in April, May, and that's when Chris did it.
And how long would you think it would take if someone's going to do it on a recreational?
I think you should give yourself 8 days. Yeah.
Just in time.
And no gels.
No
Don't take any gels.
gel.
Like marathon goo gels. Yeah, you don't know about those?
No.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's delightful in the spring.
Yeah, hi, Chris. Through Born to Run, you popularised the recent phenomenon of barefoot running and also the introduction of chia seeds. Did you come across a similar food item that the Cretan runner used?
Not so much a food item, but a food approach. And it's funny, I thought about this. I tell you, if you took the Cretans and you put them in the Copper Canyons, they would probably eat and act the same as the Tarahumara Indians. And you took the Tarahumara, put them on Crete, same thing. I think what I became intrigued by was seeing this consistency of behavior and eating patterns throughout history and throughout regions. Basically what chia does is it acts as a nice slow burn fuel that allows you to both hydrate and give yourself caloric density pretty efficiently. And so, but on Crete, I think it was actually, the Cretan diet became the Mediterranean diet, and this idea of nuts, olives, bit of meat, lots of forage greens. The other thing I started looking into too, I found a woman in Brooklyn who actually forages for food in Brooklyn, which you would think would be the desert of nutrition. She was finding, one of the cool things she found was, I forget exactly what it was like sorrel or something, but we were actually outside the Brooklyn Co-op, which is this expensive, pricey place, where sorrel sells for like $7 a pound. She's like, it's actually growing here in the cracks of the sidewalk, outside. But one of the things she showed me was, and Pete, who's actually an expert horticulturist as well, was actually able to point out the things on the ground. And we would see people like picking up weeds and putting them in these blue plastic shopping bags. But the deeper the color, the more phytonutrients are involved. So the stuff you're plucking from the ground for free is actually more calorically dense than the stuff you're buying in the store. But again, I just keep circling back to the same things. Like if you lower the glycemic level, like the Tatamata did, the better off you're going to be. Yeah. There's another question over here, I thought?
So this question kind of related actually to a few. So both on the barefoot running and changing the diet. So is there any research on, I guess, reversing, let's say, poor adaptation? So I think like barefoot running, right? People look for like an easy switch, right? So I think it became kind of a fad in some ways, and people kind of flipped that switch and did it, and some people's bodies aren't ready for it, they get hurt. Same thing on with diets, just kind of flicking the switch, and it's been more of a fad than a lifestyle. So is there any research on people kind of reversing rather than just overnight changing?
Is this on, by the way? Is it on? No? Okay, let's put this down. The whole idea of flipping a switch, like that's the problem. How many years ago was it? 6, 7 years ago, 2006, sort of that math is 9 years ago? Yeah, almost 10 years ago. I was actually in London for a conference on fascia, and someone introduced me to this guy named Lee Saxby, who does run retraining, and he changed my running gait, and now I'm back here again, and I went right back to Lee Saxby and his guys again, because it's a process of learning an art, like ballet dancers don't go, oh, perfect, I never have to take another class, I'm done, So to me, a physical skill is a skill that you need to constantly refresh. Again, the problem is, and I hear this all the time with barefoot running, the first question every time is, how long does it take? Like, what's the minimum amount of time I can expend on this? And to me, it's like, there's no minimum, it's the rest of your life. So, but then the question you have to ask yourself is, like, what's the point? What exactly are you trying to accomplish? Do you want the medal from London Marathon, or do you want to actually enjoy the physical act for a long time? And the other thing too is the whole idea about even the question barefoot running is like, why is it even a question? Like, you are born with feet. You are not born with shoes on those feet. So you adapted to something else. So if you want to be dependent, you can be. I shouldn't go on the topic. I'll start foaming at the mouth. Are there some more questions?
I think we've got time for one more question.
Oh, it's a good one. Burning question.
Anyone else?
Uh-oh.
I just wanted to ask a bit more. So you kind of mentioned diet as one thing to make yourself burn fat. Was there any other kind of things you could take away as a runner to try and burn fat more?
Yeah. So the whole fat is fuel thing, again, I find it really interesting because it's so effective and it's so simple, that it's almost nothing prescriptive about it. And the guy I asked about it, Phil Moffatone, I said, I found the guy, he lives out in the desert, he's hard to reach. I sit down, like, okay, now I'm gonna get it. And I gave him a pad and paper, and I actually went off to like wash the dishes from lunch, and he was done before I got away from the table. It's just very simple. You only do two things. You do a thing called the 2-week test, which is you strip out all the high glycemic foods from your diet for just 2 weeks, just to see how your body responds. And the second thing you do is, for your training, you keep it below your anaerobic threshold. You tell your body that there are no emergencies, we are in a Zen state, we are doing a 10-day silent retreat, we don't need any sugar. And you combine those two things of remove the sugars, remove the stresses, and train that way. So you basically wear a heart rate monitor, and whenever it beeps up, you chill out again. It is really frustrating mentally because you want to go fast, and you want to do this kind of stuff, and you want a bowl of ice cream. But it's funny, 2-3 weeks, everything changes. The cravings go, your body feels better, and for that reason, it's sort of self-motivating because you just keep feeling better and keep feeling better, and you want to stick with it. Yeah, to me, it makes all the difference. And what I love about it, again, is 2-3 weeks, and you got to sort it out. Yeah. Good. Well, thank you all very much for your attention. I really appreciate it. Thank you. Hey, Chris. Good to see you. You will